I never imagined my own commander would bury me alive before the enemy even tried. You train for bullets. You train for shrapnel. You train for the concussive force of an IED that turns the world upside down. But you don't train for the silence. Not the silence of the grave, but the silence of a room full of men, your brothers, looking at you like you're a disease, like you're something they need to scrape off their boots. I remember the exact moment the accusation landed. It didn't hit me like a physical blow. It was worse. It settled on me like a suffocating shroud, heavy and wet. Captain Vance stood over me in the dust, the acrid smoke of the ambush still drifting across the valley floor, his finger pointing at my chest like a weapon. He didn't scream. He didn't lose control. He spoke with the cold, absolute authority of a man who had already written the history books. He signaled them, Vance said. 3 words. That was all it took to erase 6 years of service. 3 words to turn me from Staff Sergeant Thorne, the guy who fixed their comms and called in their medevacs, into a pariah. I looked around at the squad. These were men I had bled beside. Corporal Jenkins, whose wife I'd helped move into base housing. Ramirez, who owed me $20 from poker. I looked for a flicker of doubt in their eyes, a shred of loyalty, but I saw nothing but confusion curdling into suspicion. I saw the doubt take root instantly, fed by the fear of the ambush we had just survived. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab Vance by his tactical vest and demand to know what the hell he was talking about, but I was frozen, not by fear, but by the sheer, overwhelming weight of the betrayal. I didn't know it at the time, but that was the moment they marked me as a traitor. I didn't know that while I was frantically checking my radio for malfunctions, trying to figure out how the insurgents knew our exact grid down to the meter, the answer was standing right in front of me. The enemy wasn't in the hills. He was wearing the same uniform. He was saluting the same flag. They called me a traitor. They stripped me of my weapon. They zip-tied my hands behind my back in front of the local villagers we were supposed to be protecting. But they forgot one thing. They forgot that in modern warfare, nothing truly disappears. Every signal, every ping, every whisper of data leaves a ghost. Vance controlled the platoon. He controlled the narrative, but he didn't control the sky. He didn't know that the satellite footage was already processing. He didn't know that the eye of God was watching from orbit. This is how I almost lost my life, not to the Taliban, but to a lie. And this is how the truth came back from space to burn the real traitor to the ground. To understand how it went wrong, you have to understand the job. I was the RTO, radio telephone operator, for 2nd Platoon. In the infantry, the RTO is the lifeline. If the gunner is the fist, the RTO is the voice. I carried 30 extra pounds of batteries and a PRC-117 radio on my back. My job was to weave clarity out of chaos. When the bullets fly, everyone looks at the RTO to bring down the thunder or get the wounded out. I took pride in it. I knew the frequencies better than I knew my own family's birthdays. I knew how the ionosphere shifted at dawn, how the mountains in Coast Province swallowed signals, and how to bounce a transmission off a satellite when the terrain tried to kill us. Captain Vance had arrived 3 months prior. He was a fast tracker. You know the type. Perfect crease in his uniform, boots polished even in the mud, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The brass loved him. He was efficient. His reports were poetry. But the grunts, we felt something else. It was a coldness, a detachment. When Vance looked at you, he wasn't seeing a soldier. He was seeing a resource, a number on a spreadsheet. ROI, return on investment. I'd catch him sometimes, staring off into the distance, tapping his fingers on his thigh, not with nervousness but with calculation. I tried to ignore the gut feeling. In the military, you follow orders, not intuition. But the vibe in the platoon had shifted since he took command. Patrol routes were changed at the last minute without explanation. Supply drops were delayed, and the ambushes, they were getting smarter, closer. The mission that day was supposed to be a standard presence patrol through the Aldwara Valley. Hearts and minds, they called it. We called it walking bait. We rolled out at 0400. The world was gray and cold. I sat in the back of the lead Humvee, the handset pressed to my ear, listening to the rhythmic, comforting hum of the net. Checkpoint Alpha, clear, I reported, my voice a monotone drone. Moving to Bravo, signal strength 5 by 5. Vance was in the vehicle behind us. Usually the CO stays central, buried in the middle of the stack for protection. But that day, He had insisted on trailing the formation. Better vantage point for terrain analysis, he'd said during the briefing. I didn't think twice about it then. Now, I replay that moment every night in my sleep. He didn't want a better vantage point. He wanted separation. He wanted to be behind us when the hammer dropped. The valley was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that has teeth. The locals weren't in the fields. The goats were gone. The shutters on the mud brick houses were closed tight. Every instinct I had, honed over. 3 deployments, screamed Ambush. I looked at Jenkins across from me. He was 19, a kid from Ohio. He was chewing gum so hard I could hear his jaw popping. He looked at me, his eyes wide, trusting my unease. Stay sharp, I told him off the radio. Safety off. Watch the ridges. I keyed the mic. Captain, visuals are weird. Sector is empty. No civilian pattern of life. Recommend we hold at phase line blue and launch a drone. There was a pause. A beat of static. Negative, Sergeant. Vance's voice crackled back, crisp and utterly devoid of concern. Intel is solid. Push through to the village. We have a timeline to keep. Sir, I pressed. It feels like a setup. The atmosphere is wrong. You're paid to operate the radio, Thorn, not to analyze the atmosphere. Push. Through. I clenched my jaw. Roger. Pushing through. We entered the bottleneck of the valley. High, jagged ridges on both sides. A classic kill zone. I was already reaching for the handset to call for an abort. Protocol be damned. When the world disintegrated. It wasn't small arms fire. It was precision mortar fire. The first round didn't walk in. It landed directly on the hood of the third vehicle. The concussion blew the windows out of our Humvee. The air instantly turned into a mix of pulverized rock and red mist. Contact front. Contact right. RPG. I kicked the heavy armored door open, dragging Jenkins out into the dirt as machine gun fire raked the side of our truck like hail on a tin roof. We scrambled for the cover of a dry irrigation ditch. The dust was so thick, I could taste the copper of blood and the sulfur of explosives. Thorn! Get air on the line! The squad leader screamed, firing blindly over the berm. Get us some support! I pulled the radio around, ducking as a bullet snapped past my ear. I dialed in the emergency frequency for air support. Dead air. I toggled the encryption keys. I switched to the secondary network. I tried the distress beacon. Nothing. Just white. Noise. A rhythmic, pulsing static that I had never heard before. I can't get a signal out, I yelled, panic rising in my throat. Something's jamming us. It's broad spectrum jamming. Fix it. I can't fix physics. The whole net is down. I looked back toward the rear of the convoy. Through the swirling dust, I saw him. Captain Vance. He wasn't taking cover. He wasn't firing his weapon. He was standing near the rear of his vehicle, shielded by the bulk of the armor. He was holding a device. Not his military radio, but something smaller. A hardened, ruggedized handheld terminal. He looked up at the ridge. He looked down at the device. He tapped the screen twice. And then, the mortars stopped. Just like that, the heavy machine guns on the ridge fell silent. The ambush hadn't been repelled. It had been paused. I stared at him, my brain trying to process the impossibility of it. The dust began to settle. The groans of the wounded started to fill the sudden, terrifying silence. Vance put the device in his drop pouch, smoothed his uniform, and walked toward the lead element. His face was a mask of fury, but his eyes were glittering. He walked straight up to me. I was still kneeling by the radio, handset in hand, trying to understand why the jamming had stopped the second he put his device away. He grabbed me by the shoulder strap of my vest and hauled me up. You signaled them, he said, loud enough for the survivors to hear. What? I stammered, my ears ringing, blood trickling from my nose. Sir, the radio was jammed. Don't lie to me, Sergeant. He shoved me back against the armored door. I saw you key the handset right before the first round hit. You gave them the confirmation. That's insanity, I shouted back, adrenaline dumping into my system. I was calling for a halt. Check the logs. I checked the logs, Vance hissed, stepping in close, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper only I could hear. And the logs say you broadcast our position on an open channel 3 seconds before impact. You killed these men, Thorn. He turned to the platoon sergeant, his voice booming now. Disarm him. Place him under arrest. We have a traitor in the ranks. He sold our coordinates. The ride back to base was a blur of humiliation and physical pain. I was zip-tied, thrown into the back of a cargo truck like a sack of grain. I sat on the metal floor, vibrating with the engine, while the wounded groaned on stretchers above me. Every drop of blood that fell from the stretchers felt like an accusation. I watched the boots of my squad mates. None of them looked at me. They stared out the back flap, their profiles hardened against me. The seed had been planted. Vance was smart. He used the chaos, the fear, and the sudden cessation of fire to create a narrative that made sense to terrified men. The mortars stopped because the traitor was safe. It was a lie, but it was a comforting lie. It gave them a target for their anger. When we rolled through the gates of the fob, the atmosphere changed. Usually a returning patrol is met with relief. This time, we were met by a phalanx of military police. Vance must have radioed ahead on a secure channel, one that wasn't jammed. "Step down, traitor," an MP said, grabbing my arm. He didn't use my rank. I didn't have a rank anymore. I was marched across the compound in full view of the battalion. I kept my head up, refusing to look at the ground, but inside, I was crumbling. I felt naked. I felt erased. The whispers started immediately, spreading like wildfire. "Did you hear? Thorne sold us out. He called in the strike. 5 grand. That's what Jenkins's leg cost." They threw me into the box, a modified shipping container used for high-value detainees. A single cot, a bucket, no window, just a vent that cycled hot, dusty air that tasted of diesel fumes. They took my shoelaces. They took my belt. They took my dignity. For the first 48 hours, I sat in absolute darkness. No interrogation, no food, just water. That's a tactic. They let you stew. They let your own mind become your enemy. I replayed the ambush 1,000 times. I replayed the radio checks. I knew I hadn't broadcast on an open channel. I knew my encryption keys were valid, but doubt is a parasite. Did I make a mistake? Did I hit the wrong switch in the panic? No. I whispered to the empty metal room, my voice cracking. No. I saw him. I saw Vance with the device. I saw the timing. But who would believe a staff sergeant over a captain with a pristine record? It was my word against the chain of command, and the chain of command is made of iron. On the 3rd day, the door opened. It wasn't Vance. It was a man I didn't know. A warrant officer from CID, Criminal Investigation Division. His name tag read Holloway. He looked tired, disheveled, like a man who hadn't slept in a week. He carried a folding table and 2 chairs, setting them up with methodical slowness. "Sit," Holloway said. I sat. "You're in a deep hole, Sergeant," Holloway began, opening a ruggedized laptop. "Captain Vance has provided a sworn statement. 3 other soldiers have corroborated that you were on the radio immediately preceding the attack. The localized signal analysis shows a burst transmission originating from your vehicle's position." "From my vehicle," I said, my voice raspy from dehydration. "Not from my radio." Holloway looked up, his eyes unreadable behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Is there a difference?" "Yes, sir, there is. Because Captain Vance was 10 meters away with a handheld terminal I've never seen issued." Holloway didn't blink. He didn't write it down. He just stared at me. "You're accusing your commanding officer of treason to cover your own incompetence? That's the strategy?" It wasn't incompetence. It was a setup, the jamming, the precision of the mortars, the fact that they stopped the moment he looked at that device. "Sir, check the specific frequency. Check the modulation." "We are checking everything," Holloway said, his tone flat. "But right now, the evidence paints a picture of a disgruntled NCO who made a deal with the locals. We found cash in your locker, Sergeant. $5,000, wrapped in plastic, taped under the false bottom." My blood ran cold. The room spun. "That's a lie. I don't have a false bottom in my locker. I don't have $5,000. We found it, Thorne. Fingerprints are being run now. But I suspect we'll find yours, Vance." He had been thorough. He hadn't just framed me for the signal. He had planted the motive. I felt the walls closing in, tighter than before. I was going to Leavenworth. I was going to die in a cage, labeled a traitor, while the man who sold my friends was going to get a medal. I leaned forward, the handcuffs digging into my wrists. I looked Holloway in the eye. I needed him to see me, not the prisoner, the soldier. "Sir, you're a tech specialist, right? CID doesn't send grunts to..." "Look at logs." Holloway nodded slightly. "I specialize in digital forensics." "Then stop looking at the radio," I pleaded. "Vance is smart. He knows how to spoof a radio log. He knows how to plant cash. But he's arrogant. He thinks he's invisible. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you look up, I said. Look at the sky. Holloway paused. The sky. The timestamps, I said, my mind racing, connecting the dots I had agonized over for 3 days in the dark. We were in the Aldwara Valley. That's a high-priority surveillance zone. There had to be a bird overhead, an ISR platform, a drone, a KH-11 satellite, something. The logs from the localized comms are encrypted, Holloway said slowly. Vance provided the decryption key, but the raw data is consistent. Forget the local comms. I slammed my hand on the table. Pull the raw satellite uplink data, not the radio net. The orbital logs, the spectrum analysis. Holloway frowned. That requires a level of clearance I don't have, and it takes weeks to process. We don't have weeks. He's going to do it again. He's selling the coordinates, sir. He's selling us. Holloway closed the laptop. He stood up. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He just knocked on the door to be let out. Don't get comfortable, he said as he left. 7 more days passed. 7 days of hell. I did push-ups until my muscles failed. I paced the 6 feet of the container until I wore a track in the dust on the floor. I had to stay sharp. I had to be ready. I hallucinated. I heard the mortars hitting. I heard Jenkins screaming. I saw Vance's face in the rust stains on the wall. I wondered if maybe I was crazy. Maybe I was the traitor. But then I'd remember the device. The pause. The silence. I didn't know what was happening outside. I didn't know that Holloway had taken my desperate plea seriously. I didn't know that my request for satellite telemetry had triggered a red flag at the NSA regional desk. See, when you ask for raw satellite logs, you aren't just asking for a recording. You're asking for the digital footprint of every electronic device in a specific grid square. It's a massive amount of data. Usually they scrub it, they filter it, but Holloway hadn't scrubbed it. He had pulled the thread, and the whole sweater was unraveling. On day 10, the door opened. It wasn't the MP guard with water. It was 2 men in suits, civilians, spooks, and behind them, Captain Vance. Vance looked smug. He looked like a man who was there to witness the final nail being driven into the coffin. He was wearing his dress uniform. Get him up, Vance barked at the MPs. They hauled me out. The sun was blinding. I squinted, trying to adjust to the glare, stumbling as they pushed me. They marched me not to the brig, but to the TOSI, the Tactical Operations Center, the nerve center of the base. The room was dark, cool, lit only by the glow of massive monitors. The air conditioning hummed, a stark contrast to the oven I had been living in. There were officers there I didn't recognize, a bird colonel, a few majors, and Holloway, sitting at the main console. Vance stepped forward, snapping a salute. Sir, is this necessary? The prisoner is a flight risk and a security threat. He should be processed for transport to Germany immediately. The colonel turned. He was an older man, scarred and weathered. He looked at Vance with an expression I couldn't place. It wasn't approval. It was curiosity. The prisoner. Stands, the colonel said. Investigator Holloway, proceed. Vance stiffened. I felt a flicker of electricity in the air. Something was wrong. Vance felt it too. Holloway didn't look at me. He was focused on the keyboard. He typed a command, and the main screen flickered to life. It was a digital map of the Aldwara Valley, a 3D topographic render, incredibly detailed. This is the playback of the ambush, Holloway said, his voice calm, analytical. Time stamp 0800 hours. On the screen, blue. Dots represented our convoy. Red zones represented the enemy positions on the ridge. Here is the alleged transmission from Staff Sergeant Thorne's radio, Holloway said. A waveform appeared on the screen. It originated from my vehicle. See? Vance said, crossing his arms, a smirk playing on his lips. Clear as day. He broadcast the position. Can we wrap this up? Wait, Holloway said. He held up a finger. He typed another command. Now, let's overlay the National Reconnaissance Office. Spectral analysis from the KH-11 satellite that was passing overhead at that exact microsecond. We pulled the raw telemetry. A new layer appeared. It was a complex web of lines, green and yellow, raining down from above. The signal from the sergeant's vehicle, Holloway explained, pointing to the screen, has a latency of 0. It was a localized broadcast. But look at the source code of the packet. The screen zoomed in. Numbers cascaded down like a waterfall. This signal wasn't generated by a military PRC-117 radio, Holloway said. his voice rising slightly. "The handshake protocol is wrong. It's missing the crypto key tag. It's a spoof. A digital clone meant to look like the sergeant's radio ID." The room went silent. You could hear a pin drop. Vance shifted his weight. "Equipment malfunction," Vance muttered, sweat starting to bead on his forehead. "Combat stress on the hardware. It happens." "Negative," Holloway said. He sounded stronger now. He turned to look at Vance. "We traced the origin of the spoofing signal. It didn't come from the sergeant's seat. It came from a device emitting a dual encrypted burst signal using a commercial satellite frequency, a frequency not monitored by our standard comms." Holloway hit a key. A bright red line appeared on the map. "It didn't originate from my vehicle. It originated from the vehicle behind me, from the exact spot where Vance had been standing. The device," Holloway continued, "was pinging a server in a non-extradition country. It was uploading real-time GPS coordinates of the convoy, and in return, it was receiving a confirmation signal, a halt fire command." The colonel turned to Vance. "Captain, you carried a non-issued communication device on patrol." Absolutely not, sir. This is a glitch. The satellite data is misinterpreted. This is a witch hunt." Vance's voice was cracking. The smugness was evaporating, replaced by the desperate panic of a man watching his life implode. "We aren't done," Holloway said. He was relentless now. "We accessed the server logs that the device pinged. We found a transaction history, cryptocurrency transfers, large ones, coinciding with 3 previous ambushes in this sector, including the one where Lieutenant Miller was killed." The screen changed again. Bank logs, dates, times, casualty counts, the price of our blood. "You were selling the coordinates," I said. The words came out of me involuntarily. My voice was quiet, but it filled the room. "You were selling us. You waited until the check cleared, and then you stopped the mortars." Vance spun around to face me, his face purple, veins bulging in his neck. "You shut your mouth, you traitorous piece of—" "Enough!" The colonel's voice cracked like a whip. "Captain Vance," the colonel said, his voice dropping to absolute zero. "We triangulated the device's MAC address. It's registered to a shell company, but the purchase order was traced back to your personal IP address stateside. We found the login credentials in your quarters 10 minutes ago." Vance looked at the screen. The red line pointing to his location was undeniable. The satellite didn't lie. The physics of the signal didn't lie. The math was the judge, the jury, and the executioner. The silence in the talk was deafening. It was the sound of a career ending. It was the sound of justice arriving like a hammer from the heavens. "MPs," the colonel said. "Secure the captain." The same MPs who had marched me in now stepped toward Vance. He tried to back away. "This is a mistake. You're listening to a grunt. I'm an officer. I have connections. They slammed him against the console. The sound of zip ties zipping shut was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. It was music. "Captain Vance," the colonel said, "you are under arrest for treason, espionage, and accessory to murder. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you start using it." Holloway looked at me. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He typed one last command, and the red line on the screen turned green, confirming the source. The colonel walked over to me. He motioned for the MPs to cut my ties. My hands were numb, my wrists raw and bleeding where the plastic had bitten into the skin. "Sergeant," the colonel said, "it seems we owe you an apology, and a hell of a lot more." I rubbed my wrists, feeling the blood flow back into my fingers. I looked at Vance being dragged out, kicking and screaming about his rights. The man who had looked at us as statistics was now just a number himself. "I don't want an apology, sir," I said, my voice steady. "I just want my radio back, and I want to go back to my squad." The reinstatement was swift. The charges were dropped with prejudice. The $5,000 in my locker was proven to have fingerprints that matched Vance, not me. I walked back into the barracks that night. The men were there. They had heard. News travels faster than light in a unit. Jenkins, the kid I had, dragged into the ditch, stood up. He was on crutches, his leg heavily bandaged. He looked at me, shame burning in his eyes. The rest of the squad stood up too. "Sarge," Jenkins whispered. We didn't know." He said, "I know," I said. I walked over and put a hand on his shoulder. "He fooled the brass. He fooled the system. You didn't have a chance." I sat on my bunk. I looked at the empty space where my gear used to be. I would get it back. I would wear the uniform again. But something had changed. I realized that blind loyalty is a weakness. I realized that the man giving the orders isn't always the one serving the country. I realized that sometimes, the only thing that stands between a soldier and a firing squad is a stream of zeros and ones beaming down from space. Vance is in Leavenworth now. He'll never see the sun without bars across it again. They say he's still trying to appeal, claiming the satellite data was manipulated. But you can't manipulate gravity. You can't manipulate the truth when it's written in the stars. I'm still here. I'm still on the radio. But now, when I check the net, I don't just listen for the enemy outside the wire. I listen for the ghosts inside the machine. I check the logs. I watch the officers. Because I learned the hard way. Trust is earned. Respect is given. But the truth has to be fought for. Where loyalty ends, justice begins.